There is a truth many people never hear until their heart is already tired, their mind is already confused, and their giving has already become a burden instead of worship. Tonight I want to talk to the part of you that has obeyed, given, sacrificed, and still quietly wondered, why does this feel so heavy? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear may break years of fear in a single moment. Some truths do not arrive softly. They shake old walls. They pull down ideas we trusted for years. They force us to ask whether we followed God, or just repeated what we were told. And this is one of those moments. If you have ever felt pressure when money was mentioned in church, if you have ever felt guilty because you could not meet a number, if you have ever feared that heaven was disappointed in you because your hands were empty, do not leave this message too early. The next few minutes may change the way you see giving, grace, obedience, and the heart of God itself. Because what has been hidden behind tradition for so long is finally coming into the light, and once you see it clearly, it becomes very hard to go back to fear again. Beloved, I speak with a serious heart today, not because I want to stir rebellion, but because truth matters too much to leave buried. Over many years in ministry, one lesson returns again and again. The Spirit of God does not always lead us into comfortable places. Sometimes He leads us into the deep places where long-held beliefs must be tested, where what is solid remains and what is human begins to crumble. For years the word tithing has been spoken in churches with strong certainty. It has been repeated from pulpits, taught in classes, pressed into believers, and treated by many as if it were an unchanging command for every Christian in every generation. But beneath that confidence sits a question many people are afraid to ask. Is that really what the New Testament teaches? Or have many believers been carrying a weight that God never asked them to carry? Listen closely. This is not about attacking churches. It is not about stopping generosity. It is not about creating selfish believers. It is about removing confusion. It is about replacing fear with peace. It is about making room for a cleaner, freer, more honest kind of worship. And before this message is done, you may understand why so many people have lived under pressure, why so many leaders avoid this subject with full honesty, and why this truth feels so shocking when you hear it plainly for the first time. One of the biggest misunderstandings in the modern church is the idea that every believer under grace is still commanded to give a fixed 10% as a required tithe. Many have heard this so often that it feels unquestionable. But when you open the New Testament and read carefully, something surprising appears. There is no clear command telling followers of Jesus to give 10% of their income as a binding law. Not one direct instruction, not one moment where the apostles set that rule upon the church. Instead, what you see is a dramatic move from law to grace, from compulsion to willingness, from external requirement to inward conviction. That shift makes many people uncomfortable because whole systems have been built on the older message. Jesus did mention tithing, yes, but when He did, He was speaking to people still living under the Mosaic law, especially the Pharisees. And even then, His focus was not to praise their percentage. His focus was to expose their empty religion, their lack of mercy, justice, and faithfulness. After the resurrection, after the birth of the church, after the gospel began to spread through the apostles, that command language disappears. Watch that closely. It matters. The message changes, the tone changes, the covenant changes. And if the covenant changes, the way we understand giving must also change. In the Old Covenant, tithing had a specific purpose. It belonged to a national system given to Israel. It supported the Levites, who had no land inheritance. It helped maintain temple life, sacrifices, feasts, and the religious structure of that covenant people. It was connected to agriculture, produce, flocks, national worship, and covenant law. But when Christ came, He fulfilled the law completely. He did not patch it, He fulfilled it. The temple-centered system reached its end in Him. The sacrificial structure found its completion in Him. The priesthood changed in Him. Under the new covenant, every believer has direct access to God. There is no temple tax to sustain. There is no Levitical tribe waiting for assigned support. There is no repeated animal sacrifice that needs to be funded. The old frame has passed, and a new one has taken its place, yet many still speak as if nothing changed. That is where confusion enters. They lift a command from one covenant and drop it into another without fully asking whether the structure beneath it still exists. Stay with this thought, because it explains so much. When the foundation changes, the system built on that foundation must also be examined. Otherwise, people end up defending a form without understanding the purpose it once served. Because of this confusion, many sincere believers still live with the fear that if they do not tithe, they are somehow under a curse. They hear old verses quoted at them with great force. They are warned that their finances will fail, their blessings will dry up, their protection will weaken, and their lives will fall out of order if they do not meet the required number. But that kind of fear does not match the heart of the gospel. Christ redeemed believers from the curse of the law. That is not a small statement. That is a door flung wide open. If a person belongs to Christ, then teaching them that they remain under a financial curse unless they give a fixed percentage does not strengthen grace, it weakens it. It paints God as a collector standing over his children with a demand sheet in his hand. But the New Testament keeps showing us a different picture. It calls believers into generosity, yes, but generosity that is willing, cheerful, proportionate, compassionate, and led by the Spirit. It teaches support for the needy. It teaches care for the church family. It teaches generosity toward gospel work. It teaches open hands. But it does not build those things on fear. And this is where many people begin to breathe again. Because once the fear is removed, giving no longer feels like a fine you pay. It begins to feel like love you release. When you look at the early church, the difference becomes even clearer. Those first believers did not live by a cold formula. They lived by transformed hearts. In Acts we see men and women so deeply moved by the love of Christ that they shared what they had, sold possessions when needed, and stepped forward to meet the needs around them. Notice what is missing. There is no scene where the apostles stand up and enforce a mandatory 10% for every household. There is no pressure campaign built on threats. There is no fixed demand repeated over and over. Instead, there is life, there is unity, there is compassion. There is the Spirit moving in a community that has learned to see each other as family, and family takes care of family. Widows were not pushed aside, the poor were not ignored, needs were seen and answered. That did not happen because people were trapped by law. It happened because grace had changed them from the inside out. This matters more than many realize. The absence of a tithing system in the early church is not a missing detail. It is part of the message itself. It shows what new covenant life looks like when love is stronger than duty. And do not miss this point, because this is where many viewers will begin to see the contrast with modern church culture in a very sharp and honest way. The apostles kept that same pattern in their teaching. Paul never commanded believers to tithe. Instead, he spoke of willingness, purpose, joy, and proportion according to ability. He taught that giving should not be reluctant. He taught that it should not happen under compulsion. That language is direct. It leaves very little room for pressure-driven preaching. He spoke of cheerful givers, because cheerfulness is the evidence of freedom. And then we meet the believers in Macedonia, one of the strongest pictures of grace-led generosity in all of Scripture. They were not rich, they were struggling, yet they begged for the privilege of giving. Think about that for a moment. They were not pushed, they were not cornered, they were not manipulated by warnings. They wanted to participate. They gave beyond expectation because grace had enlarged their hearts. That is the kind of giving rules can never manufacture. Rules may produce compliance for a season. Grace produces willing sacrifice. Rules can force hands open. Grace opens the heart first, and then the hands follow. If you have ever wondered why some giving feels alive and some feels heavy, this is why. One is rooted in relationship. The other is rooted in requirement. One flows like worship. The other feels like survival. And only one of those sounds like the freedom Christ came to give. Still, we must be honest about something many people feel but rarely say aloud. A large number of churches depend on the doctrine of tithing because it creates predictability for the institution. This does not mean every leader is trying to deceive people. Many are sincere. Many truly want to serve God. Many care deeply for their communities. But churches that operate with buildings, salaries, events, outreach plans, programs, maintenance costs, and ongoing financial pressure often look for a stable system. And a stable system is easier to maintain when people believe a number is required. Voluntary giving can rise and fall. Spirit-led generosity can be harder to forecast on a spreadsheet. That makes leaders nervous. So over time, what may have begun as tradition becomes treated as doctrine. and what may have been a practical financial model becomes preached as if it were a direct command from heaven. This is where the tension grows. The need of the institution begins to shape the message. And when that happens, people can end up hearing sermons designed more to secure budgets than to reveal the full freedom of the new covenant. That may sound uncomfortable, but uncomfortable does not mean untrue. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one that exposes where convenience has quietly replaced clarity. Do not click away here, because this part explains why the conversation has stayed buried for so long. Many pastors inherited this teaching without ever examining it deeply. They heard it from respected mentors. They learned it in church culture. They repeated it because it was all they had known. Others may sense that the New Testament emphasis is different, yet feel trapped by the practical fear of what might happen if the congregation stops seeing 10% as a hard requirement. They think about staff who need salaries, ministries that need support, buildings that need repairs, and missions that rely on funds, so they keep the message intact. In many churches, this teaching is reinforced with spiritual language about devourers, blocked blessings, broken protection, and financial disorder. It is effective. Fear often is. When people are scared, they give quickly. When they worry that heaven may close a door over one missed payment, they respond. But fear may raise money while still wounding faith. It may protect systems while quietly damaging people. And that damage is real. Believers start to see God not as Father, but as an authority figure constantly measuring their percentage. They feel guilty during hardship. They feel ashamed when they fall short. They feel spiritually exposed when they cannot give what others expect. Yet the New Testament never teaches believers to live under that cloud. This is why honesty matters. Not to attack leaders, but to protect hearts. Not to tear down generosity, but to purify it. Not to weaken the church, but to call it back to truth. Real biblical giving begins in the heart. It does not begin in pressure, and it does not stay healthy when fear becomes the fuel. God has always cared more about inner devotion than outward performance. This is why Jesus confronted religious people who gave faithfully in public but carried cold hearts in private. Their percentages were intact, but their compassion was weak. Their rituals were polished, but their love was missing. In the new covenant, this truth becomes even brighter. Each person gives what they have decided in the heart, not reluctantly and not because someone forced them. That is not a side note. That is the center. Giving is meant to be worship, not intimidation. It is meant to be free, not frightened. Think of the widow with the small coins. Her gift was tiny in the eyes of men, but precious in the eyes of Christ. Why? Because heaven reads giving differently. People count size. God sees sincerity. People notice percentages. God notices trust. A small gift given with love can carry more beauty than a large gift given under panic. That truth sets people free. It tells the struggling believer that they are not less loved because they are less resourced. It tells the exhausted giver that God is not waiting to punish them for poverty. It tells the anxious heart that worship is not measured by a calculator alone. And once that truth sinks in, giving starts to feel lighter, cleaner, and much more alive. Another truth that changes everything is this: God blesses generosity, not legalistic formulas. Many people have been taught to think of blessing like a machine. Put in the correct amount, then expect the correct return. Give this percentage, unlock this favor, miss the number, lose the covering. But that is not the spirit of new covenant giving. God is not calling people into a transaction. He is calling them into likeness. He blesses generosity because generosity reflects His own nature. He is a giving God. He gives mercy, grace, patience, forgiveness, life, hope, and love. So when a believer gives freely, joyfully, and compassionately, they are moving in the current of God's own heart. That kind of life opens space for peace, deeper faith, freedom from greed, freedom from fear, and often provision in ways no formula could predict. Jesus said, "Give, and it will be given to you." But He did not lock that promise behind a fixed legal percentage. He connected blessing to generosity itself. That matters. Because when giving becomes a mechanical duty, joy begins to die. But when giving rises out of gratitude, something beautiful happens. The giver is changed, the receiver is helped, the community is strengthened, and God is honored in a way that no forced system can reproduce. This is not less powerful than tithing language. It is far more powerful because it reaches deeper than the wallet. It reaches the whole person. The freedom of the new covenant is one of the most beautiful truths a believer can live in, and it touches giving in a major way. Jesus fulfilled the old covenant completely and established a new and better covenant built on grace. That means believers are not standing halfway between Moses and Christ, trying to carry pieces of both. The old system has been fulfilled, the new has come, and under this new covenant, giving is no longer tied to the legal demands of temple life or the financial support system of the Levitical order. Instead, it becomes a grace-filled response to God's goodness. This freedom does not produce selfishness when it is truly understood. It produces maturity. A person under law asks, what is the minimum? A person under grace asks, what can love do here? That is a massive difference. Grace does not lower generosity, it deepens it. It removes fear, so love can lead. It removes pressure, so worship can breathe. It removes guilt, so sincerity can grow. Some believers may give less in one season, because life is hard. Others may give far more than 10%, because their heart is burning to bless. Both can be holy when the Spirit is leading them. That kind of giving is alive, it is flexible, it is compassionate, it reflects the wisdom of God, who does not demand the same visible sacrifice from every person, regardless of their pain, their season, or their ability. That is not weak theology, that is mercy with truth. And think of the fairness in this. A rigid system treats people as if their lives are equal in burden when they are not. A wealthy person may give 10% and hardly feel it. A single parent under crushing bills may give the same percentage and feel physically afraid. A struggling family may part with money they needed for groceries, not because the Spirit led them but because fear told them something terrible would happen if they did not. That is not the freedom of Christ. The new covenant leaves room for wisdom, honesty, and Spirit-led proportion. It says give as you are able. It says let your giving rise from willingness. It says let love guide the act. That opens the door for both compassion and courage. It also creates space for the Holy Spirit to direct believers personally. Sometimes that means supporting gospel work through the local church. Sometimes it means helping a family in crisis. Sometimes it means funding missions, feeding the poor, blessing someone privately, or responding to a need no one else saw. This is why heart-led giving is so powerful. It is not locked inside one rigid channel. It is living, moving, listening, and responding. It turns believers into active stewards, not just religious payers. And when that happens, generosity becomes more than an obligation fulfilled at the end of the month. It becomes part of a life that is awake to God, awake to people, and awake to the quiet opportunities heaven places right in front of us. So now as this message comes toward its close, I want you to let this settle deep. This is not a call to rebellion. It is a call to freedom. It is not a command to stop supporting the work of God. It is an invitation to support it with a clean heart, a clear mind, and a joyful spirit. It is not about becoming less generous. It is about becoming more honest, more alive, more led by grace than by fear. If you have carried guilt for years, release it. If you have believed that God was angry with you because your giving did not match a number, lay that lie down. If you have felt manipulated, controlled, or silently burdened every time money was preached, let truth loosen those chains. The Father is not looking for fearful children with trembling hands. He delights in willing hearts. He smiles over cheerful givers. He honors sincerity. He sees the small gift given with tears and trust. He sees the hidden act of generosity no one applauds. He sees the love behind the offering. So walk forward in freedom. Give with wisdom. Give with joy. Give with compassion. Give with peace. And let your generosity be born from relationship, not pressure, from worship, not worry, from grace, not guilt. Because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And when liberty enters giving, worship becomes beautiful again, the heart becomes light again, and the believer finally learns what it means to live open-handed before God without fear,